Picture this: months of training, countless hours pounding the pavement, and all roads leading to one big day. My first marathon. I had it all mapped out: the perfect race pace, the triumphant finish, and the post race high. But the reality? That hit harder than the wall at the 28th kilometre. Crossing the finishing line, I wasn't celebrating. I was defeated. My legs were shot, my time was nowhere near my goal, and all I could think was, what went wrong? Looking back, the truth is my failure didn't happen on race day. It started long before, in my training. And today, I'm going to share the hard lessons I learned during my first marathon so you can avoid the same mistakes I made. Let's get into it. Training for my first marathon was done in 5 distinct blocks, hitting a certain milestone distance for each of them. I started my training in late April, getting me through to November where I would run my first marathon. Starting from zero long distance running experience, having 15 kilometers be the furthest that I'd ever run before. I suddenly went from running a 5 kilometer run every week or so to running 4 days a week and strength training twice a week in the gym. And these were what my 5 training blocks looked like for my marathon training. The first block being about 4 weeks training for the Mother's Day Classic 10 kilometer event in May. The second training block lasting about 7 weeks training for the Gold Coast Half Marathon in July. The third training block lasting about 6 weeks again training for my 25 kilometer home-based event in August. The fourth training block lasting about 7 weeks training for our 30 kilometer selection event held in Alice Springs in September, before the fifth and final training block, which was only about 4 weeks before running the New York City Marathon. So as I got to race day, I was a ball of emotions. I was excited, I was nervous, and I was just so ready to get this thing done after training so hard for so long. Reflecting now, I was rather consistent with my training, only missing a handful of sessions due to a range of niggles and setbacks. However, that didn't detract from my overall performance increasing with every single milestone event that I completed. There was also a small bit of panic on race day with the buses that were leaving from our hotel to the starting line, finding that myself and my squad members who were also running the marathon had to wait for another small shuttle bus about a good hour or so after the final buses left from our hotel to actually head over to the starting line. I found myself squashed between 55,000 other runners, cruising through the boroughs of New York, not really caring about the pace that I went out at the start of the race, and forgetful about the inclines on that start too. I found myself cruising up to 26 kilometers with my good friend Tigger, going through the bridges and all the declines that New York City had to offer, really struggling over the Queensboro Bridge before getting to about just after the 26 kilometer mark where I saw my family there cheering me on, getting a sudden boost ready to crack open those final 16 kilometers to finish the race strong. And this was where the lights in my journey started to fade, crashing right into the wall at the 28 kilometer mark and being in a full world of hurt. The remaining 16 kilometers of the race were a battle with some of the darkest demons I'd ever met in my life. And I kid you not, I still haven't purchased my New York City Marathon photos due to how bad I looked in them. There was just so much trauma written on my body in those photos. And while this is a very condensed version of my New York City race experience, I've got a full video on it here in the card above. So now, what were these hard lessons that I learned after running my first marathon? First was getting caught up in the hype and excitement at the start of the race, finding everyone was zooming off from the start line, all cheery and smiley before getting to that 30 kilometer mark where there were people just struggling to get through, and I was definitely one of those people. I got a lot of advice in the lead up to the marathon, obviously to go out a lot slower than you think, but me being a first time marathon, I didn't quite listen and paid the price as a result. The second was no awareness of the toll inclines would take on my body during the course of the New York City Marathon. I was running in a little bit of a hilly area in Melbourne when training for the marathon, but nothing would have prepared me more than obviously going out running the New York City Marathon and just experiencing inclines like I'd never faced in my training. And keeping it completely simple, my body just wasn't conditioned to handle the toll of the inclines through the race. And yet, after 4 marathons, I still haven't quite put hills as training into the mix just yet. However, moving to a new place with a lot of hills, it's starting to get a little bit better in that regard. Third lesson, and this probably was the biggest reason I wanted to go out and run a faster marathon after New York, was the limited knowledge about race day nutrition, but also fueling myself before the race. Looking back, probably 72 hours before the race, while I was consuming some carb-heavy meals, I just wasn't fueling myself enough in regards to topping up my electrolytes, but even taking on some liquid carbohydrates to really fuel my body up it was just like, okay, eating until I was full and not really snacking between meals in the lead up to the race. And looking back to race day now, I remember struggling to even consume my fourth gel, deciding then and there to stop consuming any race day fuel, which subsequently led to me smashing into that wall at 28 kilometers and really not able to run the remaining distance for that 16 kilometers, finding myself suddenly just guzzling Gatorade, which I hadn't tried before race day, and just anything that the spectators were offering too. I remember taking drinks of Coke, some lollies, and even just cups of salt to get me through the hell that I was experiencing. My final lesson that I learned was not running to the conditions of the course. So that included the weather, the factoring in the inclines and declines over the course, and just being able to respect the marathon distance. And it was a rather warm day in New York for the race, so I should have been consuming a lot more water out there on the course, but also beforehand, really not factoring in just how much the heat would actually impact my performance overall, and understanding the reasons why I was suddenly craving salt towards the end of the race and just taking anything that was on offer. Obviously, I've gone on to run another 3 marathons following New York, but also understanding that for each of those subsequent marathons was appropriately trained and ready to undertake the distance this time. So what exactly did I change after running my first marathon? First up was finding a much flatter course to run my second marathon in. This was the Ballarat Marathon, where I was able to actually run the full marathon distance without stopping. Second was increasing the amount of days I was running, but also increasing the mileage too, to slowly build up my base that I developed after my first one. So this was upping my running from 4 days a week to 5, but also maintaining the 2 strength training sessions each week for a total of 7 sessions for a training week. My third change was really dialing in my nutrition. This was my biggest focus when training for my second marathon, wanting to ensure I was able to fuel myself correctly before the race, but also managing to consume enough nutrition during the race that allowed me to run the full marathon distance. And I'm happy to report I managed to consume all 6 gels during the race, and even added additional carbs in the carbohydrate electrolyte drink option that was available at the aid stations for the course. If you're keen to see my Ballarat second marathon experience, also leave a video card here for you to watch it. The last change was actually undertaking my first marathon training and having an existing base that I could build off of for my second through to my fourth marathons here. Again, with 0 long distance running experience previously, I experienced so many niggles and setbacks that I really didn't know how to manage, but obviously going on and deciding to run an additional 3 marathons after slowly started to see my body get stronger and more resilient when it came to the training load I was putting it under, finding that niggles like my shin splints started to go away as a result of increasing my mileage, and just my general ability to train consistently still improved drastically. So this final section is to those of you who are training for your first marathon, or maybe getting to race day in the coming days as we speak. I know I too was watching very similar videos to understand what this unknown I was getting into so I could prepare myself as best as possible. First and foremost is to trial everything during your training. So not only the nutrition you're aiming to take, but also everything from the apparel that you'll be wearing all the way through to the shoes you want to be doing race day in. You don't suddenly want to be getting into your taper thinking, oh, I'm going to try these new gels that have landed on the market. Stick to what's been working for you during training and take that into race day. In a way, you're wanting to keep as many variables as possible when it comes to marathon racing and yourself under your control. My next piece of advice is to start a lot slower than you think. And I know this is probably said like a broken record in the running community, but it is so true. You want to conserve your energy to actually last you through the entire marathon distance. A great analogy that I've been taught is emptying your bucket. You don't suddenly want to empty 3/4 of your bucket and have a quarter left after the half marathon. You want to gradually pour out that water over the course of the race so you're able to cross that finishing line knowing you've left everything out there on the course. Next is to trust your training, and I'm saying this with experience now as well. I'm currently preparing to train 12 amazing people to run New York this year. You're not going to hit the marathon distance before your first marathon too, so it's about understanding all of those deposits you've made into your training have compounded over time to get you into the position where you're ready to actually take on your first marathon. Have faith in it and have trust in it. Lastly, it's nothing new on race day. Keep as many variables as consistent and the same as possible, then Focus on changes after you've completed your first marathon and decide you're wanting to run another one and then another. So there we have it, friends. Some of the lessons I learned where I failed in my first marathon, luckily bouncing back in my subsequent marathons after. I hope you found this video useful, especially if you are currently training or about to race your first marathon. I know it can be quite a daunting experience, but have trust in yourself and the faith in your training that you put in. I'm curious, let me know down in the comments below what's one lesson you've learned after running your first marathon or training for your first one. I'd be keen to carry on that conversation down in the comments below. Thank you so much for tuning into today's video. If you're keen on sticking around and watching some more of my content, YouTube recommends you might like this one of mine here. I'm Jack, and I'll see you next time. Catch up.